The air smelled faintly of fresh rain and coffee beans as Alara Whitmore stepped off the narrow cobbled sidewalk and into the small town bookstore. The bell above the door chimed softly, an old-fashioned, heartwarming sound that always reminded her of summers past, of simpler days when life wasn't measured in deadlines and expectations. She closed her umbrella, brushing damp curls from her forehead, and looked around the quiet shop like she was entering a sacred place. Back in Maplewell, she whispered under her breath, her voice tinged with both relief and uncertainty. Shop hadn't changed in 10 years. The same wooden floors that creaked with memory, the same handwritten category signs dangling from shelves, and that same golden retriever curled up near the fiction section, his head lifting lazily at the scent of rain. She knelt for a moment to scratch behind the dog's ears. "You remember me, huh?" She smiled. "I used to sneak you treats when Mrs. Aldrich wasn't looking." "Don't let her fool you," a deep voice said from behind. "He pretends to love everyone equally, but he saves the real loyalty for peanut butter." Startled, Alara turned and came face to face with someone who looked like he'd walked straight out of a daydream and into her real life. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, with a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves and jeans dusted with raindrops. His dark brown hair was tousled in that careless, effortless way, and his hazel eyes soft, thoughtful, and unexpectedly kind seemed to hold more than just a greeting. "I didn't mean to speak up," he added with a crooked smile, noticing. The way she still stared at him, double quotes, "No, Alara found herself fumbling for words. "I just wasn't expecting a dog whisperer in a bookstore," he chuckled. "He's more of a peanut butter opportunist, really." That made her laugh, a light, melodic sound that drifted between them like something meaningful. She stood, brushing off her coat, trying to gather herself. "I'm Alara," she said, extending a hand out of habit more than confidence. "I used to live here left 10 years ago for college. Then life happened, and now I single quotes not back temporarily." "Read," he replied, shaking her hand firmly. "And I guess you could say I'm the opposite of that. Born and raised here. Never left, temporarily staying, permanently living. That sounds peaceful." He nodded thoughtfully. "It can be. Depends what you're looking for." There was something about him, about the way his voice didn't rush, the way he actually saw her, not just someone passing through, that made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She wandered toward the shelf labeled poetry and letters, trailing her fingers along the spines of the books. "I used to sit right over there," she said, pointing to a little window seat nestled between shelves. "Read poems and dream about love stories that never really seem to exist." Reed leaned casually against the edge of a shelf, watching her. Maybe they do exist. Maybe they just don't show up the way books promise. Alara turned, brows lifted. "Are you always this philosophical, or do bookstores bring out your inner poet?" Reed shrugged with a grin. "Only when it's raining and someone intriguing walks in asking about love stories." She smiled again, soft, genuine, touched. For a brief second, neither of them said anything. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full. Full of a connection neither of them had expected to stumble into. "I'll let you browse," Reed said, nodding toward the back. "Let me know if you need help finding anything." Alara watched him walk away, heart oddly stirred. She turned back to the shelf, picked up a book of Rainer Maria Rilke's letters, and thumbed through a page. "This is the miracle that happens every time to those who really love. The more they give, the more they possess." Her fingers paused on the words, and her breath caught. She glanced up, eyes finding Reed again, as he crouched to restock a lower shelf. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled. In that moment, something shifted inside her. Something quiet but undeniable. She hadn't come back to Maplewell looking for anything but a break from the city. A pause in the storm of life, but standing there in a tiny bookstore filled with rain-soaked air and old poems, across from a man with eyes like memory and smiles like promises. It felt like the beginning of something she hadn't even known she needed. Alara's childhood home stood at the edge of Maple Well like a memory frozen in time. White siding, wraparound porch, a wind chime that sang every time the breeze kissed it. Everything looked exactly the same, except her. She stared at the familiar wooden steps before climbing them, keys rattling in her hand. Her mother had left the place in good condition, as if she somehow knew Alara would return someday, even if just to catch her breath. Inside, the scent of lavender and cedar filled the air. The furniture was modest but warm, covered in crocheted throws and old books stacked beside every chair. A photo of her parents sat on the mantel, her father, now gone 5 years, smiling in his flannel shirt. Her mother with that soft, knowing look she always wore. Alara sank into the sofa and exhaled. Life in New York had been noise. Always movement, always pressure. As a features writer for a prominent digital magazine, she had chased deadlines like fireflies, never stopping long enough to hold one in her palm. Success came with a cost: burnout, loneliness, and the haunting ache of feeling untethered. Her editor suggested she take a sabbatical after her last health scare. Alara didn't argue. Her body was exhausted, her heart even more so. So she returned to Maplewell. Temporarily, she told herself. Just until her spirit stopped fraying at the edges. But the quiet was beginning to speak to her. Across town, Reed Foster rolled open the wide barn doors behind his small workshop. The smell of pine and freshly cut wood welcomed him, grounding him in a rhythm he'd never wanted to escape. His late grandfather had taught him woodworking on weekends, and after leaving college early choosing, calloused hands and peaceful days over lecture halls Reed had made a life from it. Foster Fine Designs was humble in size but rich in craft. Each piece was made by hand, mostly custom furniture and commissioned carvings. Tourists who stumbled into Maplewell often found his work in the town co-op or cafe. Locals trusted him for more than his craft. They trusted his silence, his reliability, his gentle way with people and pets alike. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked toward the open window, where rain still whispered against the earth. That woman, Alara, she hadn't left his mind since their encounter yesterday. There was something in her eyes. Something tired, yes, but not defeated. A flicker of someone who once believed in dreams and maybe, just maybe, was trying to believe again. He hadn't expected her. But then again, the most meaningful things rarely arrive when you're looking. Later that week, Alara wandered into the small cafe beside the town library, maize brew and books. A cozy, whimsical place where locals read dog-eared novels while sipping lavender honey lattes. She ordered an herbal tea and took a corner seat, laptop open, trying to work on an article she owed her editor, but the words refused to come. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the bookstore. To read to the way Maplewell felt like a world set apart from time. She glanced around the cafe. People here smiled at strangers. They held the door open without expecting anything in return. Teenagers helped elderly couples cross the street. It was like living inside a story where kindness was the rule, not the exception. And somewhere in the back of her heart, something softened. A few hours passed before her fingers finally began typing not the article her editor wanted, but a new piece. What if home is a place you thought you'd outgrown? Meanwhile, Reed stood in the church courtyard, helping repair a splintered bench. He wasn't overly religious, but he found peace in service-fixing things, building what was broken. The pastor came by with a coffee. You coming to the Harvest Festival next week? Reed nodded. Wouldn't miss it. Got a few wood displays for the fundraiser auction. Bring someone. It's not just for the old and married, you know? The pastor teased. Reed smirked. We'll see. But later that night, while sanding a cedar bench, his mind wandered. Not to any of the women he'd casually dated over the years, but to the girl in the bookstore, her eyes full of forgotten hope, her laugh like sunlight through overcast skies. Alara's days in Maplewell began to find their rhythm. Mornings with herbal tea, writing in the sunroom, walks through winding town trails, afternoons in the bookstore, where she often found herself, coincidentally, at the same aisle where Reed stocked new titles. And Reed? He found more reasons to linger near the poetry section. He began stopping by Maze to grab tea for his assistant, who didn't exist. Conversations grew from minutes to hours. They talked about books and childhood dreams, about cities that broke them and places that healed. She told him about writing features that never felt quite true. He told her about carving pieces that meant something to families' cribs, tables, memorial benches, and when she asked him why he never left Maplewell, he said simply, because it's not about where you are. It's about who you become when you're there. She didn't say it aloud, but those words stayed with her, because here she didn't feel like a burnt-out journalist. She felt like a girl rediscovering herself. One crisp Saturday, Alara followed a sign that read, Maplewell Autumn Makers Market Local Crafts and Creativity. Booths lined the town square, brimming with handmade jewelry, honey jars, knitted scarves, and rustic wood art dot at the far end. She spotted Reed's booth. His pieces were breathtaking. A rocking chair that looked like it held lullabies in it. Curves, a carved quote plaque that read, In quiet moments, we find the truth. He saw her before she spoke. You came, he said, brushing sawdust from his hands. I couldn't stay away, she replied, her voice soft with something unspoken. They stood close, the crowd fading around them. Your work? It's beautiful, she said honestly. So is your writing, he said, surprising her. I saw your piece in the cafe newsletter about coming home. She blushed slightly. You read that? Twice, she laughed, biting her lip. It was just the thought I had about second chances, about being brave enough to return to something that once scared you. His eyes searched hers. Were you? She didn't need to pretend. I'm trying. And in that moment, beneath golden leaves falling from the trees and the hum of the market, Reed reached over and gently brushed a leaf from her shoulder. Neither of them spoke, but in that silence, something beautiful bloomed at the Maplewell harvest. Festival arrived with the scent of cinnamon, roasted corn, and 1,000 flickering lights strung across the trees. The entire town square glowed like a lantern, its amber light catching on hay bales, hand-painted signs, and pumpkins carved, with grinning faces. Music floated from the gazebo, where a folk band strummed cheerful tunes, and children darted between booths with sticky fingers and warm cider. Alara hadn't meant to come. Not really. She told herself it was too crowded, too small town, too ... Close, but Reed had casually mentioned the festival twice that week, and when she found a handwritten invite tucked under her teacup at Maze, hope to see you there. Booth 14, R. She smiled and made up her mind. She arrived just past dusk, wrapped in a soft cream cardigan and scarf, cheeks kissed pink from the autumn air. Her eyes scanned the crowd until she saw him. Reed stood at his booth in a charcoal flannel shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows, talking to a couple admiring one of his carved benches. When his gaze found hers across the square, a slow, quiet smile spread across his face like the sunrise that starts without warning. You made it, he said, stepping around the table. You bribed me with carved pumpkins and charm. How could I resist? Guilty on both counts, he said, his grin turning playful. They wandered together after that, slowly meandering past the stalls. Reed bought her a caramel apple, which she nibbled at carefully to avoid a sticky disaster, and he teased her. For eating it like it was a science experiment. You're impossible, she said, laughing. I'm practical. That's different. Practical doesn't smile like that when someone struggles with candy, she said, brushing sugar from her lip. He looked at her for a heartbeat too long. You've got something, ... he said, motioning gently toward the corner of her mouth. She reached for it, but his hand moved first, his thumb brushing lightly across her cheek, then pausing for just a second longer than necessary. Her breath caught, though she tried not to show it. The night went on with golden warmth. They watched the pie-eating contest, cheered for kids in potato sack races, and took silly photos in front of a giant scarecrow. Reed even let her drag him into the hay maze, where they got lost on purpose and laughed like old friends. But it wasn't just laughter. It was something deeper. Each moment between them felt like a thread delicate, building something invisible yet undeniable. A few days later, Alara was writing in her sunroom when a knock came at the door. She opened it, to find Reed holding 2 thermoses and a small basket wrapped in cloth. I figured you'd skip lunch. Writers forget meals, right? She blinked, surprised but touched. Only on days ending in Y. He handed her the basket. Soup, cheddar biscuits, and spiced apple cider, all homemade. Well, mostly. My neighbor Zhang made the biscuits. I supervised. She stepped aside. Come in. I can offer tea and minimal judgment in return. They ate together in the small kitchen, sunlight spilling across the table, steam curling from their cups. Conversation flowed easily about favorite childhood snacks, embarrassing teen fashion choices, and how Alara once tried to dye her hair blue and ended up with swamp green for a month. You're braver than me, Reed chuckled. The wildest. Thing I did was try to skateboard down Miller Hill. I still have the scar. She leaned forward, intrigued. Show me. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a thin white line across his forearm. Wow, she said, softly tracing it with a fingertip before realizing what she was doing. They both stilled. His skin was warm. Beneath her touch. Her hand hovered there, and the air between them thickened with quiet meaning. She pulled back gently. Sorry, no, he said, voice low. Don't be. Her heart thudded against her ribs like it wanted to speak for her. The next evening, they walked the edge of Maplewell Lake, where the trees turned amber and crimson in the dying light. Reed carried a blanket, and they found a quiet spot beneath. An old oak tree. The lake shimmered like glass, and the sky melted from gold to rose. I used to come here to breathe, Alara said. When I was a teenager, it felt like the only place in town where I didn't have to be ... anything. He looked at her, thoughtful. What did you want to be back then? She smiled faintly. Everything. A poet, a novelist, a traveler. Someone brave, someone sure of herself. Seems like you still are all of those. I don't feel that way. He reached for a fallen leaf, held it between his fingers. You don't have to feel brave to be brave. Sometimes just staying soft in a hard world is courage. She turned to him, struck by the depth in his words. Where did you learn to say things like that? I build things, he said, glancing down. Sometimes people tell me things while I do. I listen. That's all. She looked at him then, not as a small-town craftsman, not as the handsome guy from the bookstore, but as a man who saw things others missed. A man who held silence not as emptiness, but as understanding that something shifted again. And this time, she didn't fight it. A week later, they found themselves back in the bookstore. It had become their unofficial meeting place, neutral, familiar, safe. Reed was organizing a new display of wooden bookmarks he'd donated for the reading program. Alara was browsing the fiction aisle, pretending not to peek at him every few minutes. Are you one of those people who dog ears pages? He asked suddenly, raising an eyebrow. I might be, she teased. Depends who's asking. He walked toward her, leaned against the shelf. That's practically book abuse. I prefer to call it personality. He chuckled. You've got a lot of that. She stepped closer, almost within reach. Is that a compliment or a warning? His eyes softened. A promise. The silence that followed was charged, unspoken, stretched thin like a thread about to snap. They stood there, two hearts just breaths apart, neither moving, neither willing to shatter the moment too soon. Finally, Alara whispered, "This is starting to feel like more than friendship." Reed didn't flinch. He nodded, slowly, gently. I know, but I don't know what to do with that. He reached out then, not pulling her in, just holding her hand, fingers brushing hers with infinite patience. We don't have to know, he said. We just have to be honest. Her eyes filled slightly, not with sadness, but with relief. She didn't say it aloud, but she felt it dot with him. Honesty didn't feel like a risk. It felt like breathing. The first time Reed showed up on Alara's porch at sunrise, he brought a thermos of strong black coffee and 2 pastries from May's, wrapped in wax paper. I figured writers don't sleep much, he said, sheepishly, holding out the offering. I usually just survive on caffeine and regret, she said, smiling as she stepped aside to let him in. They sat on the porch swing, wrapped in old quilts, watching the town awaken under golden light. The morning was quiet, save for the occasional bird song and the creak of the swing's chain. Alara's fingers brushed against his as she reached for the thermos. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. I've never watched the sunrise on purpose before, she murmured, her head resting against the wooden slats. It's peaceful, he said. It feels like something is beginning. She glanced at him. Is it? He didn't answer. Not with words. He simply looked at her the way people do when they've already decided what they're falling into. And for Alara, the moment hung like a whisper between 2 heartbeats. Their time together became a rhythm. Afternoons in the workshop, where Reed taught her how to carve initials into cedar. She was terrible at it. Her E looked like a sideways B, but she laughed until her stomach hurt. And that was what mattered. Evenings in her sunroom, sharing poetry and old journals, memories and half-finished dreams. She read him one of her unpublished essays, hands trembling slightly. It's about failure, she whispered, about how we dress it up in productivity and pretend it doesn't break us. He listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he didn't offer critique, just truth. That was beautiful, brave. She didn't realize she was crying until his thumb gently wiped a tear from her cheek. No one's ever said that about my writing before, she whispered. Then they weren't really reading it. Reed took her on a date the following weekend. An actual date, though he didn't call it that. He told her to dress warm and meet him at the edge of Maplewell Creek just before dusk. When she arrived, bundled in a navy coat and mittens, he greeted her with a playful smile and a small lantern. What are we doing? She asked, walking to where? You'll see. The trail wound through tall pine trees, the air crisp with hints of snow. Reed's hand found hers halfway through, and neither of them let go Dot when they reached the clearing. Alara gasped softly. A small wooden dock stretched out into the still water, ringed with tiny lanterns. A picnic blanket lay waiting, with thermoses of cider, a basket of roasted vegetables and cornbread, and a tiny speaker playing soft jazz. You did all this? He shrugged. Didn't want to go somewhere loud. Thought maybe you'd prefer quiet stars. She smiled, blinking back sudden emotion. You were right. They ate, talked, shared dreams under constellations. Do you ever think about leaving? She asked him, not just the town, but your comfort zone. He thought for a moment, then said, I used to, when I was younger. I wanted to see the world, travel, chase something big. What stopped you? My parents got sick. Then My grandfather needed help. Life happened. She studied his face in the starlight. Do you regret it? He turned to her gently. Sometimes, but not when I'm here. Not when I'm with you. The air shifted. Alara's breath hitched. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything, he said. Just let it be real. And under the stars, real felt safe. A few days later, Reed invited her to his grandmother's. House for Sunday dinner? It's a bit chaotic, he warned. What's life without a little chaos? It turned out to be one of the warmest nights of Alara's life. Reed's grandmother, Pearl, was a tiny, sharp-eyed woman with a cane and a heart full of sass. She hugged Alara like they were old friends and grilled her with affection. So, Pearl said between bites of sweet potato casserole, are you the reason Reed's been smiling like a fool all week? Grandma, Reed groaned. Alara laughed. I might have something to do with it. Well, don't stop, Pearl said, nodding with approval. This boy's been too serious for too long. They spent the evening playing dominoes, drinking warm cider, and listening to Pearl tell stories about Reed's childhood, including the time he got his head stuck in the porch railing trying to rescue a kitten. I was 7. Reed protested. And the kitten had more sense than you. Pearl added. On the drive back, Alara rested her head against the window. That felt like home. She said quietly. He glanced at her. You are. As October gave way to the first whispers of winter, the town grew colder, but their connection only deepened. Alara's fears, however, began creeping in. Some nights she sat by the fireplace, staring at her open laptop, unsure of what came next. Her sabbatical would end in 6 weeks. New York would call her back. The life she'd built, however exhausting, was still waiting. Could she really give it all up? Could she stay in Maplewell for a feeling? But when Reed was near, the questions faded. He made her feel whole, not because he completed her, but because he reminded her she was already enough. One night, they sat in her backyard under an old wool blanket, watching the sky for meteor showers. Do you remember the first thing I said to you? She asked, her voice soft. You asked if I was a dog whisperer. She smiled. And you said he just wanted peanut butter? Reed looked over at her. You were beautiful that day. I was soaked and anxious. You were real. You didn't pretend to be anything you weren't. She turned to him slowly. Neither did you. Silence stretched between them, but not empty. He reached for her face gently. Can I? Yes. And when he kissed her, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't fire. It was warmth, slow, intentional, steady, like a heartbeat that knew its rhythm, like breathing in a world where you'd held your breath too long. When they pulled away, neither of them spoke. They just leaned into each other, like a promise. The first snowfall came like a whisper, soft and delicate, dusting the streets of Maplewell and Silver White. Children laughed as they chased each other with mittened hands, and shopkeepers strung lights between windows, their warm glow bleeding into the quiet evening. But inside Alara's heart, the cold was growing. She stared at the email on her laptop screen, rereading the words she'd been dreading. Hope you're rested. Your sabbatical ends in 6 weeks. We've lined up a big story for your return. A podcast appearance, too. Can't wait to have you back. Let's talk next Monday. ... The word felt like a door closing. She didn't tell Reed right away. They were sitting at the kitchen table that night, sharing leftover pecan pie and listening to an old Ella Fitzgerald vinyl. Reed was telling her about a cedar swing he'd been commissioned to carve for a couple's 50th anniversary. You'd like them, he said. They bicker like old sitcom characters, but they've never missed a morning walk together in 50 years, rain or shine. Alara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. He noticed. You okay? She hesitated. Just thinking. About what? She shook her head, offering a quick smile. Nothing important, but it was important. It was everything that the distance crept in gradually, like fog curling through open windows. Alara pulled back, slightly skipping a morning walk, replying to texts a little later than usual, choosing work over afternoons in Reed's workshop. Reed felt it. Not in the obvious ways, but in the pauses. The hesitation in her voice, the way her eyes didn't linger like they used to, and even though she hadn't said it yet, he already knew. She was leaving. It came to a head 2 weeks later during a drive home from Pearl's house. They sat in silence for most of the ride. The warmth between them had cooled, not out of anger, but fear. Alara finally broke the quiet. I got the call, she said softly, from my editor. Reed didn't turn his head. When do they want you back? January. A beat? You going? She glanced at him. I don't know. He nodded once, slowly. You do? Reed, it's okay. Really, I get it. No, you don't. Her voice cracked. I don't even know what I want. I came here to breathe, to figure things out. And then you happened. And now I don't know if I'm choosing what I love or who I love. He pulled the truck into her driveway and turned off the engine. Snow was falling gently outside, blanketing the silence between them. I'm not asking you to choose. He said, I'd never asked you to stay, but you want me to. He didn't deny it. I'd never hold you back, he said. But I've seen you come alive here, not just with me. With yourself, you smile more. You write what matters to you. You breathe deeper. I know, she whispered. That's what terrifies me. He looked at her, really looked at her. His voice was quiet but strong. Then be brave. She shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. What if I give this up and regret it? What if you go back and regret that instead? He stepped out of the truck before she could respond, walking around to open her door. But instead of taking his hand, she stepped back. I need time. He nodded once, and this time he let her walk away. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She wandered through the house like a ghost, every room filled with memories she hadn't realized she'd made. The kitchen, where Reed taught her how to bake cinnamon rolls and ended up covering her in flour. The sunroom, where she'd read poetry aloud until he fell asleep beside her. The porch swing, where they'd watched the stars and dared to dream. It was all soaked in him. And yet her old life still echoed, like a string that hadn't quite snapped. Deadlines, prestige, acclaim. She had worked years to build her career. Could she really give that up for something that felt like a beautiful dream? Or was the dream what finally made her feel awake? Across town, Reed sat in his workshop long past midnight. He carved in silence, shaping the edge of a walnut photo frame butt. His hands weren't steady. He wasn't angry. He was afraid. He had let himself believe in something he hadn't dared to hope for in years. A future that felt full. A partner who saw him, who made quiet feel sacred. Not lonely, but maybe he wasn't enough. Maybe her world was too big for her. Maybe love wasn't always enough to anchor someone whose wings were aching to stretch. The following days were filled with space. They texted little, spoke only in brief moments. Alara spent hours walking the snowy trails, trying to sort the noise in her mind. Every logical part of her said to return to the life she'd built. Her reputation, her identity, but the other part, the part that came alive when Reed looked at her, when Maplewell held her in silence and soft snow whispered something else. What if love wasn't the distraction? But the truth? One afternoon, she found herself at the bookstore again. The bell chimed as she stepped inside, and the golden retriever greeted her with a wag. But Reed wasn't there. Instead, Mrs. Aldrich approached with a smile. He's out on delivery. Left something for you. She handed Alara a brown envelope. Sealed with a bit of string dot inside was a single wooden bookmark, hand-carved. Etched on one side were the words, "You were never too much for this place. It was waiting for you." On the other side, a date too. Weeks from now, and the phrase, "Meet me where we began." Alara clutched it to her chest dot, and something broke open inside her. The sky was a canvas of soft gray on the morning. Alara made her choice. She had spent the last 2 weeks sitting in the in-between heart split between two worlds, one forged by ambition, the other by love. She'd spoken to her editor, postponed her return, and avoided questions she didn't have the courage to answer, but the wooden bookmark in her hand kept whispering to her, "Meet me where we began, So she returned to the place that started everything, the little bookstore with creaky floors, sleepy golden light, and memories etched into every corner. Snow fell softly outside as she pushed open the door. The bell chimed. The world felt like it held its breath. Reed stood by the poetry aisle, just like that first day, as if time hadn't passed, as if he'd always been there, waiting. He turned when she walked in. Their eyes met for a moment. They just stood in silence, emotions tumbling between them like falling snow. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he said quietly. "I almost didn't," she whispered, "because I was scared, not of you, of what loving you would cost me." Reed swallowed but didn't speak. She stepped closer. "For years, I believed success had to be loud, that it had to look like big cities, constant motion, my name printed in places that made people pause." Her voice wavered. "But then you showed me what stillness feels like, what real life feels like, that love isn't something you chase, it's something you choose." Every day, tears welled in her eyes. "And I was terrified to choose you, because I thought choosing you meant losing me." Reed's voice broke through the quiet. "And now?" She took a shaky breath. "Now I realize. Loving you feels like breathing for the first time. Like everything else before this was just survival." A single tear slid down her cheek. "I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live here with you." Reed stared at her, stunned, but his eyes glistened with something fierce and tender. "Alara," he whispered, stepping closer. "I never wanted to be your detour." "You weren't," she said. "You were the map." And then finally, like the last piece of a song falling into place, he took her in his arms and kissed her. It wasn't soft this time. It was everything they hadn't said. Everything they'd feared, and everything they were finally ready to hold. She melted into him, arms tightening around his neck, heart thudding like a drum waking after silence. His hand rested against her lower back, pulling her closer, grounding her, as if to say, "I've got you. I've always had you." When they pulled apart, foreheads resting together, he smiled through his tears. "I built you something," he said softly. She laughed, tearful and overwhelmed. "Of course you did." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small wooden box, smoothed and polished. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, was a tiny carved key, delicate, intricate, shaped like a tree branch with a heart at its base. "It doesn't open anything," he said, "except maybe a life if you want it." She traced it with her fingers, breathless. "I do." Later that night, they stood on the porch of her home, their home now, with snow swirling around them in quiet celebration. Alara leaned against him, watching the world glitter. "I thought life had to be complicated," she said softly, "but you make it feel simple, safe." He kissed the top of her head. "Because real love doesn't confuse you, it calms you." She looked up at him, eyes full of wonder. "I love you," she whispered. He smiled. "Loving you," he said, felt like breathing for the first time. And beneath the snow-dusted sky, they held each other, close hearts, no longer waiting, no longer wandering finally home. Winter lingered gently over Maplewell, blanketing the town in a soft hush of snow and light. Wreaths hung from every porch. Twinkling lights framed the bakery windows. And in the tiny bookstore where love had quietly begun, a sign hung on the door, closed early for something beautiful. Inside, Alara stood between bookshelves in a deep emerald dress, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. The store smelled like pine and warm paper, and outside the windows, golden dusk gave way to early evening. Reed waited at the end of the aisle, dressed in a dark charcoal sweater and crisp slacks, his hair still dusted with sawdust despite pearls. "Best efforts. Are you sure about this?" Alara whispered, teasing when she reached him. He took her hands. "More sure than I've ever been about anything." She smiled, heart full, as the minister began to speak just them, their closest friends, and the town that had watched their love unfold. They said vows between stacks of poetry and the classics. They kissed as snow began to fall outside. And when they stepped out of the shop, Reed carried her through the fresh snow to their truck, laughter echoing through the quiet town. A year later, Maplewell felt just as magical, but now it felt like theirs. Alara's sunroom had transformed into a writing haven. Morning light spilled across her desk, where drafts of her first memoir lay stacked in neat piles. The title? The Quiet Between Chapters. It was a love story, yes. But more than that, it was about finding peace where she never thought to look. About learning that sometimes the life you were meant for isn't the loud one everyone applauds, it's the soft one that holds you steady. Her editor had cried on the phone when she pitched it. "This is your best work," he'd said. "You finally sound like you." And she had smiled, watching Reed outside the window, building a reading bench for the local elementary school. His dog asleep at his feet. She finally felt like her, too. Reed's workshop had grown, too. After a glowing write-up in a regional design magazine, thanks to a certain former journalist, orders started pouring in, not just from Maplewell, but from nearby towns and cities. He still worked slow, intentionally, still made time to leave. Wildflowers on Alara's pillow, still kissed her shoulder before pouring her tea, still danced with her in the kitchen when no one was watching. "I didn't think I'd ever have this," he confessed once during a slow waltz on the porch. "A love that doesn't ask me to be more, just ... allows me to be." She pressed her forehead against his. "That's the only kind of love I ever want to give you." One golden autumn afternoon, they took a drive out to the edge of town, to a stretch of land with a single tree standing in the middle of a field. Reed pulled out a folded paper from his pocket plans for a small cabin. "Something simple," he said. For someday, Alara studied the sketch: a sunroom, a porch swing, a little writing nook in the back. "I think someday sounds perfect." They planted tulip bulbs around the tree that day, Reed digging carefully, Alara choosing colors like a painter, preparing her canvas dot. And every year after, when the snow melted and the world yawned into spring, the tulips bloomed in their place red, white, and softest pink. A garden of promises planted in silence, growing in love. At night, when the world quieted and the town settled beneath stars, they often sat on their porch, wrapped in a blanket, Alara's head on Reed's shoulder. "You ever miss the noise?" he asked once. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I hear this ... She motioned to the wind, the hum of crickets, the rustle of pine, and I remember why I came back. Why did you?" She smiled. "Because I wanted to stop surviving. And you, Maplewell, gave me the space to finally breathe." He kissed her forehead, gently, "And I'll spend my whole life protecting that breath."